The desert stretched endless as an ocean, yet it carried no waves, no tides, only stillness, only the whisper of wind combing across tall, brittle grass. The sun had gone low, bleeding red into the horizon, the kind of red that looked less like fire and more like a wound the earth could never quite close. Evening was coming, and with it, the quiet that only the Wild West knew. A quiet so deep you could hear your own heart knocking inside your chest like a restless horse in a stall. Two brothers lived in that silence. They were not men of fortune. They were not men of destiny. Just two poor ranchers, scraping a life from soil too dry and cattle too thin. Their cabin leaned into the wind, as if even the wood had grown tired of standing. A single corral of crooked fence posts circled what few longhorns they owned. The land gave nothing freely, and what little it yielded it seemed to resent parting with. The older one, shoulders broad as the barn beams he had hammered into place, carried bitterness like another man might carry his rifle, always near, always ready. His voice had grown sharp, like a blade kept too long on stone. He had seen too many winters, too many debts, too many dreams dried up before they ever bloomed. The younger one, though, still carried softness in his gaze. There was hunger in him, yes, for food, for a better life, for a break in the storm, but there was also something gentler. He looked at the horizon not with suspicion, but with a boy's hope, as if maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would bring rain, or mercy, or some quiet miracle. Together they worked, dawn to dusk, side by side in the dust. And though blood bound them, silence often grew between them too. The older one scolded. The younger listened. The days wore them down, and the nights pressed heavy. It was during one such night that their lives split from the ordinary path of hardship and stepped into the kind of story that would echo for decades. The brothers had been returning from a long day of checking cattle along the dry creek bed. Darkness had pooled in the valleys, and coyotes sang their mournful songs on distant ridges. Then they smelled it, smoke carried by the wind, not the kind from a lone campfire. This was harsher, acrid, thick. They rode faster, boots digging into horse flanks, and soon came upon a small homestead, now nothing but embers. The thatched roof collapsed inward, glowing red in its dying bones. The air was scorched, full of ash and silence. Silence, except for the faintest sound, a child's whimper. The brothers dismounted. Among the ruin, hidden behind a half-burnt trough, lay a girl. No older than 10, her hair tangled and black as raven feathers, her small body scraped and bruised. The paint on her face told her story, Apache. The older brother froze. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. He knew what this meant. Taking her in was not just a burden. It was danger. If settlers found out, they'd call it harboring an enemy. If the Apache discovered her with them, they might call it theft. Every road pointed to death. Leave her, he muttered, voice heavy. We can't carry another soul. We can't carry ourselves. But the younger brother knelt. He brushed soot from her forehead, listened to the shallow rhythm of her breath. His heart broke, as if it had always been waiting for this exact moment to fracture. We can't leave her, he whispered. Not to die here, not like this. The older one turned away, pacing the ashes, hands tightening to fists. His mind counted the risks, the consequences, the debts already drowning them. But his heart, though hardened, though guarded, could not fully silence the echo of his brother's words. So they carried her. Wrapped in an old saddle blanket, she was small enough to weigh less than a sack of feed, yet heavy enough to tilt the scales of their lives forever. They placed her on the horse between them and rode through the desert night, the stars above wide and watchful, as if they too were waiting to see what these men would choose. Back at the ranch, they laid her on a bed of hay in the barn, afraid to bring her inside the cabin lest someone visit. She stirred in sleep, murmuring words in a language neither brother knew. The younger one sat vigil beside her, feeding her sips of water, tucking the blanket closer around her fragile frame. The older brother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring with eyes that revealed little. Days passed. The girl did not speak, but her eyes followed them. Dark, cautious, sharp. She ate sparingly, always watching, always guarded. The younger brother tried to coax smiles from her with bits of food or awkward gestures. At first she refused them all, but hunger softened her resistance, and she took what was given. Slowly, the wall between fear and survival began to thin. She helped with small things before long, fetching water from the well, handing tools from where they lay, humming low, almost inaudible songs at night, the kind that seemed to stitch the air back together after long days of silence. For the younger brother, her presence became a quiet balm. The ranch still bore its weight, drought, hunger, the endless struggle, but with her there, the nights did not feel so empty. Her eyes, though haunted, reminded him that even in a cruel world, something fragile could survive. For the older brother, she was a shadow that haunted every decision. He saw danger in her every movement. To him, she was a storm cloud looming overhead, waiting to break. "It won't last," he muttered often. "Nothing good ever does." And yet, he never turned her away, because though he wrapped his heart in stone, though his words carried edges, he was still the man who had carried her out of that ash. Somewhere inside, even if he'd never admit it, he wanted to believe kindness could be worth the risk. The nights grew longer, the days colder. Winter crawled across the land. The girl stayed. Her trust remained quiet, unspoken. But one evening, as the younger brother dozed by the fire, she reached out and placed a small hand over his arm. No words, no promises, just a touch. That night, the younger brother dreamed of rivers flowing through the desert, of grass growing green on barren land. And though neither of them knew it then, that simple act, that decision in the ashes to save a child who was not theirs, a child the world had cast aside, would ripple through time like a stone dropped into still water. The circle would widen, year by year, until 20 winters later, it would return to their doorstep with the force of an army. For now, though, all they knew was this: a girl had been carried from fire into their lives, and though the future remained unwritten, the present carried the fragile weight of hope. In the Wild West, hope was rarer than gold. The days folded into one another like worn pages in a book. The girl grew stronger, her bruises fading into faint shadows, her steps no longer stumbling. Her presence became a rhythm in the brothers' lives, not loud, not demanding, but steady, like the faint sound of wind pressing against the cabin walls at night. She was still cautious, still watchful. Her eyes spoke where her tongue did not. When she looked at the younger brother, there was a flicker of trust, like a flame taking its first breath. When she looked at the older, there was distance, respect perhaps, or maybe wariness. He carried weight in his gaze, and children often sense burdens long before they understand them. The ranch was poor, but her small hands made it less lonely. She fetched kindling, carried buckets of water, helped mend ragged clothes with nimble stitches. Sometimes she would hum, soft and low, as she worked, Apache songs, words neither man understood but both felt. They were songs of the earth, of rivers and wind, of mothers and fire. They wrapped around the cabin in ways silence never could. The younger brother found himself listening even when he pretended not to. Her songs soothed him after days that wore his body thin. They reminded him of something sacred, something worth protecting. He began to feel as if the land itself had softened since she came. The sunsets brighter, the nights less cruel. But the older brother, he could not rest so easily. His eyes searched the horizon for danger, his ears strained for the sound of hooves. Every kindness the girl brought, he measured against the weight of risk. The world does not forgive weakness, he told his brother one night as they mended the fence. And this is weakness. The younger one answered gently, "No, this is the only strength we have left." The older turned away, but he said nothing more. Winter passed, then spring, and the girl began to smile. It was a rare sight, fleeting as a desert flower, but when it came, it softened even the older brother's heart, though he tried to hide it. She would sit on the fence rail and watch the cattle, her dark eyes calm, as if she had been born to the rhythm of ranch life. Sometimes she laughed, a sound so light it startled the men, who had forgotten laughter could live in their home. Yet the world beyond their small ranch was not blind. One afternoon, a trader rode in, his wagon rattling with goods and barrels. He was a thin man, quick-eyed, the kind who noticed everything worth noticing. He spoke with the older brother, bartering for hides and salt. And then his gaze shifted to the girl, who was kneeling by the well, filling a bucket. He raised a brow. "Didn't know you had kin out here." The older brother stiffened. "She ain't ours." The trader's eyes lingered, sharp with curiosity. "Apache, ain't she?" "Looks it." The younger brother stepped forward. "She helps around. That's all." The trader gave a thin smile, but it carried weight. "Folks in town wouldn't take kindly. You'd best be careful. Times are tense. War's brewing." And just like that, he was gone, dust trailing behind his wagon wheels. But the unease he left did not leave. The older brother's fear sharpened. That night, as firelight danced in the hearth, he spoke harshly. "We can't keep her. Word will spread. Traders talk, and townsfolk listen. The Apaches will come, or the whites will come, and either way, we'll pay." The younger one looked at the girl, sitting quietly in the corner, mending an old shirt with thread too thin. She did not look up, though she must have heard. His heart clenched. "She's a child," he whispered. "She's ours now, whether we wanted it or not." But the older brother's voice cracked like dry wood. "She's not ours. She never was." The tension grew like storm clouds. Days carried silence heavier than words. The younger brother still found comfort in her presence, still spoke gently to her when they worked, still taught her small English words while she taught him Apache ones in return. They built a quiet bridge, plank by plank, across two worlds. The older one crossed that bridge less and less. He watched, always watched, but his fear kept him to shore. Then, one evening, the sound of hooves thundered across the land. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes sharp with recognition. She ran to the doorway and stared at the horizon. Dust rose in the distance. Apache riders. The brothers stiffened. Their rifles lay within reach, but neither moved. The girl whispered a word, a name, perhaps, her voice trembling not with fear, but with something like longing. The riders drew near, fierce against the setting sun, their ponies moving swift and sure. They circled the ranch, arrows poised, eyes sharp. One of them called out, his voice ringing in their tongue. The girl cried back, a flood of words bursting from her silence. And just like that, they knew. She belonged to them. The younger brother's heart cracked as he watched her run toward them, her small figure swallowed by warriors who looked at the ranchers with cold, measuring eyes. One dismounted, stepping close. His face was painted, his stance proud. He spoke in broken English. "She ours. You safe." The words carried no gratitude, only fact. The girl clung to his arm, yet her gaze turned back to the brothers, to the cabin, to the small world she had lived in. For the first time, she spoke in English, her voice fragile but clear. "Thank you." Then she was gone. The Apache warriors rode into the horizon with her at their center, the dust rising behind them until it swallowed the last glimpse of her. The younger brother stood frozen, the word echoing in his ears. His throat burned with unshed tears. The cabin felt emptier than it had the day they built it, emptier than it had ever been. The older brother let out a long, heavy breath, as if a weight had been lifted. But his eyes betrayed him, for in their depths lingered not relief, but something closer to regret. That night, silence returned. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of loss. Thus ended the first chapter of their bond, not with violence, not with farewell, but with absence. The brothers returned to their work, their days marked by cattle and dust, their nights by fire and shadows. And though the girl was gone, she had left something behind, something neither man could name. Hope, perhaps, or longing, or a wound that would never close. But time would carry them forward, as it always does. And 20 years later, when the horizon once again filled with dust, that wound would open, and from it would rise not a girl, but a woman leading an army. The years did not vanish. They lingered. They clung to the cabin walls, to the cattle pens, to the weary faces of the brothers. Yet they slipped away all the same, one after another, like beads falling from a broken string. Seasons came and went. Winters cut deep. Summers burned. Springs gave just enough to keep hope alive, and autumns took back whatever small gift had been given. The land never softened. It demanded, always demanded. The brothers aged beneath its hunger. The younger one's hair, once dark as river silt, turned streaked with gray. His shoulders bent slightly forward, not from defeat, but from years of carrying burdens without complaint. Still, his eyes, though tired, held a trace of that same softness, a gentleness that refused to die. The older one grew harsher with time. His face became a map of lines carved by sun and sorrow. His hair thinned, his hands shook after long days, but his voice never lost its sharp edge. If anything, it grew sharper. He spoke less, but when he did, it was heavy with bitterness, as though every word had to claw its way out of him. And between them hung a silence that both knew the shape of, but neither dared to name. For though the girl had left, she had never truly gone. The younger brother often caught himself glancing at the horizon, as though expecting her small figure to appear again, barefoot, hair wild, humming her songs. Sometimes at night, he dreamed he still heard her voice threading through the walls of the cabin. He would wake with his heart full and empty all at once. The older brother would not speak of her. Not once. Not in all those years. But sometimes, late at night when he thought the younger was asleep, his eyes would linger on the barn where she had first lain, wrapped in a saddle blanket, half broken yet alive. And in those moments, his face softened, a softness he never allowed in daylight. Time did not just change the brothers. It changed the land itself. The world of the West was shifting. The iron road of the railroad carved through hills. Telegraph wires stretched across plains like veins of a new order. Settlers poured in, hungry for land, cutting it into parcels, fencing it with barbed wire. And with them came tension. The Apache resisted. Battles were fought. Raids answered by raids. Stories of bloodshed traveled from town to town, swelling fear, stoking anger. Some whispered the Apache would soon be crushed, their way of life stolen by steel and law. Others said they would rise fiercer than ever, striking terror into every settlement. The brothers heard it all, sitting in the corner of a saloon now and then, or listening to travelers who passed their ranch road. They said little. They drank quietly, kept their thoughts inside. But the younger brother always wondered, where was she now? Had she survived those wars? Had she grown strong? Or had the world taken her, as it took so many? Sometimes he feared she was gone. Other times he believed. No, he knew, that somewhere she lived, carrying with her the memory of two poor ranchers who had chosen not to abandon her in the ashes of a raid. It was that memory that kept him going when the cattle failed, when storms ruined the fences, when loneliness pressed down like a stone. It was a fragile faith, but it was his. The older brother? He would never admit such things. But deep down, even in his silence, he carried her too. And then, one morning, the horizon changed. It was the younger brother who saw it first. He was out near the corral, patching a fence post the wind had split. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the land. The air was still, too still, when suddenly he noticed a line of dust rising in the east. Not the thin dust of a single rider, not the scatter of a few cattle. This was wide, heavy, deliberate, an army's dust. He stood frozen, hammer in hand, as the line grew clearer. Horses, dozens of them, warriors upon their backs, the glint of weapons catching the new sun. They rode not with chaos, but with order, with unity, as though the earth itself bent beneath their rhythm. His heart thudded, not with fear, but with something deeper, recognition. He called for his brother. Together they stood as the riders drew near, their cabin and corral suddenly small against the tide of movement. The older brother's jaw tightened, his hand drifting instinctively toward the rifle leaning on the fence. But then, at the head of the warriors, they saw her. Not a girl anymore. A woman. Her hair, still black as raven wings, streamed behind her. Her posture was straight, proud, carrying the weight of command. Her eyes were sharp, but they held depths of memory, shadows of the past. She wore beads and leather adorned with colors of her people, and around her neck hung a small trinket, one the younger brother recognized. A charm he had given her once, carved clumsily from bone, to keep her safe. The sight of it nearly brought him to his knees. The army slowed, circling the ranch, warriors poised like the storm itself. Dust swirled, horses snorted, the air trembled with the sound of hooves. And then she raised her hand, and the world seemed to still. She dismounted. For a long moment, there were no words. Only silence, heavy and alive. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on the brothers. Time collapsed. 20 winters vanished. 20 summers dissolved. Before them stood not a stranger, but the child they had carried from the ashes. Her eyes softened, and then, without a word, she placed her hand over her heart. The younger brother's breath caught. He felt the years wash away, felt the wound he had carried close. His eyes stung with tears he had not shed in decades. He nodded, unable to speak. The older brother stood stiff, his jaw trembling, his chest rising and falling as though the very air fought him. But even he could not stop the memory from breaking through. His rifle slipped from his grip, landing softly in the dust. The woman said nothing. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. Behind her, the Apache army waited, still and watchful, like a storm held on the edge of release. But her silence, her hand over her heart, her gaze, it was a promise, a reminder. She had not forgotten. Not the cabin, not the fire, not the mercy of 2 poor ranchers who had chosen life over fear. And now, 20 years later, she had returned, no longer the one in need of saving, but the one with power to save. The sun climbed higher. The dust began to settle. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. And in the quiet, the brothers understood. Their past had circled back. The girl they had once carried was now the woman who carried them, in memory, in honor, in the tide of destiny that had brought her here. The land was the same. The ranch was the same. The brothers were older, frilier, worn thin. But she had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. The town of Dry Creek had never been so still. Word traveled faster than a hawk's shadow. An Apache army had been seen near the old ranch. Dust rose along the horizon, and whispers turned into fear. Merchants closed their shutters. Mothers pulled their children inside. Men polished rifles with shaking hands, though deep down they knew bullets could not stop what was coming. The brothers felt the tension long before the townsfolk did. They stood at the edge of their land, gazing across the plain where the Apache riders waited like a storm refusing to break. The woman sat tall upon her horse now, her eyes trained not on the cabin, but on the distance beyond, toward the town that had always feared her people. The younger brother's heart ached with understanding. He saw not just warriors, but a people who had carried wounds for generations. He thought of the girl they once sheltered, the child who had hummed lullabies by the fire. Now she was their leader, her presence fierce, her voice unspoken but thunderous. The older brother's grip tightened on his rifle again, though his hands trembled. He was torn between 2 storms, the fear that had ruled him all his life, and the memory of the night he had carried her from the ashes. His breath came shallow, his jaw clenched, but his heart beat a rhythm he could not deny. That night, as the town prepared for the worst, she came. Not with fire, not with steel, but with silence. The Apache army rode into the streets of Dry Creek like shadows under the moon. Horses stamped the earth. Warriors' eyes gleamed, hard and unyielding. Windows slammed shut. Men stood in doorways with rifles raised, though their courage was brittle as glass. And then she spoke. Her voice was steady, low, but carried with it the weight of mountains. She spoke in her own tongue first, her warriors listening, nodding, their faces stern. Then she turned her words into English, broken but strong. We come not for slaughter, not for fire. We come for justice. The townsfolk stiffened, unsure. A man at the front, the sheriff, raised his rifle, voice sharp with fear. Justice? You come here with an army. You expect us to believe you want peace. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice did not rise. Your people take, always take, our land, our rivers, our lives. No more. Silence stretched, long and cutting. Then she turned her gaze, slow and deliberate, to the two brothers standing just behind the line of townsfolk. And in that silence, a memory passed between them. Firelight, a saddle blanket, the echo of a child's whisper. She lifted her hand, pointing toward them. Her warriors stilled. Her eyes softened. These men, she said, voice heavy with meaning. They saved me. When world burned me, they gave me life. Because of them, I remember mercy. The town stirred. Faces turned toward the brothers. Confusion etched deep. The younger brother lowered his eyes, humbled by the weight of her words. The older brother trembled, his rifle slipping from his hands once more. She rode forward, her horse's hooves striking sparks from the stone. She stopped in front of the brothers. For a long moment, no sound but breathing. Then she spoke again, this time only for them. One kindness, she said, her voice softer, almost breaking, can echo longer than hatred. The younger brother's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to speak, to tell her what her presence meant after all these years, but his throat closed. All he could do was nod, the words caught behind his silence. The older brother swallowed hard. For decades, he had carried bitterness like armor. But now, as he stared into her eyes, the same eyes of the girl they had once carried from fire, his armor cracked. His breath shuddered, and he whispered words he had not spoken in years. I was wrong. The confession fell into the dust, fragile and final. She gave the smallest nod, as though she had been waiting all her life to hear it. Then she turned. With a single cry in her tongue, her warriors wheeled their horses. The army did not strike, did not burn, did not take. They rode through Dry Creek like a river, leaving silence in their wake. Not a soul was harmed, not a building touched. The townsfolk stared in disbelief. The sheriff lowered his rifle, his hands trembling. Mothers opened their doors. The silence of fear shifted into silence of awe. And the brothers? They stood together, side by side, watching the dust trail fade into the horizon. The younger brother's heart was full. At last, the wound of 20 years had closed, not with vengeance, but with mercy. The older brother wept silently, his face in his hands, the weight of regret finally breaking free. The woman was gone again, but this time, her leaving was not loss. It was salvation. The cabin stood quiet that night. The fire crackled, throwing shadows against the old wooden walls. The brothers sat together, older now, softer somehow. The younger one spoke first, his voice low. She remembered. The older one nodded, tears still wet on his cheeks. She remembered when I had almost forgotten what it meant. And in that moment, the silence between them, the silence that had stretched for decades, broke. They were not just two poor ranchers anymore. They were men who had mattered. Men whose single act of mercy had echoed farther than they could ever ride. And here, dear listener, is the truth this tale leaves in your hands. In a world as cruel and endless as the Wild West, a single kindness can outlive us. It can ripple through years, through hearts, through battles. It can return to us when we are old and weary, reminding us that mercy is stronger than fear and compassion louder than hate. We do not always see the fruit of what we plant, but sometimes, just sometimes, 20 years later, it rides back to us on the wind. So hold fast to kindness. Guard it like treasure. It may one day return, carrying salvation in its arms. My friends, if this story found its way into your heart tonight, let it rest there a while. Let it remind you that mercy never dies, and that kindness can travel farther than any bullet, farther than any fear. If you felt something in this tale, I invite you to share it. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me where you're listening from, whether it's a quiet farmhouse, a city apartment, or somewhere under the same stars that shone over the Wild West. And if you'd like to hear more stories whispered by the fire, more memories carried across time, stay close. Like, subscribe, and ride with me again. For the desert is full of stories, and some of them are waiting just for you.